video cut off, so we're going to start over and be talking about it. Or we're going to continue on. So what I was saying is, also during station times, so I'm going to be circulating around the room helping everyone. I can pull small groups to talk about yesterday's lesson, like the exit slip, if there was something they missed. This exit slip, so I could talk to them about this, or if they had problems with their independent practice, I could pull small groups to do that. Station time is around 50 minutes, so they should do their independent practice, 2 or 3 station rotations, and then I'm going to go ahead, for the sake of time, call them back to work on their exit ticket and go over the I can statement, and then I'll talk about the SCTS 4.0 rubric. So I would ring the chimes. Ding! Class will put their hands on their head, eyes on me, Chromebooks down. Alright class, thank you for listening and paying attention so well when I ring those chimes. I really love how table 3 has their hands on their head and is looking straight at me. I'm going to go ahead and give them a table point. I want you guys to come down. Math time is over. So when I say the word of the day, I want you to come clean up your whole, clean up your station, clean up your desks, clean up all your areas, and then I want you to go sit at your desk, and we're going to go over the exit slip real quick, and then I'm going to have you do that. You're going to turn it in, and then we'll start reading. So when I say the word of the day, I want you to go ahead and transition. Remember, do not talk. When the music turns off, your voices are off. Igneous. Ooh, wow, that was so good. Everyone is very quiet. I love that behavior. Alright, so for our exit slip, make sure you guys write your name. And I have this piece of paper that I'm going to hand out to you. But you're going to find the area of both pictures. I want you to make the arrays. So draw out your grid and make your unit squares. And then use the area formula to solve the area. Because remember, we need to double check. We need to double check what the area is. So when I say the word of the day, I want you to do that. And then when you're done, write your name, turn it in, and come back to the carpet. Before we do that, let's just go over our I can statement, because this is what I want you guys to know at the end of the lesson. So I want you guys to think in your heads, do I know this? Is there anything I need help with? Do I have any questions? And if you do, please come ask me when you're done with your exit slip, or you can ask me before. So let's say it all with me. I'll count down from 3. 3, 2, 1. I can find the area of a rectangle by making arrays and using the area and using the formula, which is length times width. And that's the secret formula that will take you all the way to the moon, because it's so cool. So that just means that you can make the grids, you can make the unit squares, and you can use the area formula. So I want you guys to show me that you can do that on this exit slip. Alright? When I say the word of the day, I want my paper passers to hand this out. Stay at your desks. Please use a pencil. And when you're done, come down, turn it in, and then come down to the carpet. Igneous. So at that point, I would give my students a couple minutes to complete the exit slip. I have a completed one here, so I can use that as my answer key. And so that is my lesson, just talking about my SCTS 4.0 rubric notes really quick. My I can statement is here that students can see the whole lesson. I went over at the beginning and the end of the lesson, and I like having it up here because the students can look at it and see what they need to know. It keeps me accountable that I'm not teaching random stuff that they don't need to know. And this lesson is taught straight from the I can statement, which is built from the statement that we had yesterday about using the unit squares to find area. So it's all connected and building on that. It just helps guide and lead my teaching. Students will show mastery of this I can statement by their independent practice, by their homework, the exit slip, and then these task cards. I will not get the information on the task cards right away because they'll be doing this station throughout the week, but when I look back at that day of the week, I can see how they did. So that was my standards and objectives. As for motivating students, and I said this a little bit in the lesson, but area I think is kind of cool because you can use it and apply it for so many different things. Just using it around your house. I said here like your kitchen table, your bed, books, baking pans, rugs, the patio. You can use area so much. And for a hook, like we found the area of rugs here. We found the area of a picture frame, and then Miss McCarthy's rug. And if I was going to do a lesson tomorrow, I would definitely have them, later on this unit, measuring real life objects, finding the perimeter, and then talking about the area. So, and I tried to use lots of pictures. The students were drawing, and they were making their arrays. They were interacting a lot of the time. Again, I mentioned using the Cheez-Its, and in this lesson also I might use that instead of like Skittles, just as a fun little different thing to use and be like, here, you get a unit square. I talked about the pattern blocks and showed them that at home they can use Legos, pattern blocks, Cheez-Its, pieces of paper, anything that's square. So that was really helpful, I think, for them. Throughout this lesson I was trying to be very positive and have a good attitude towards them, and just know that so they know I'm excited about the lesson and that they can be excited about the lesson too. If they were struggling, I wanted to find ways to scaffold them and not just tell them the answers. And then I wanted my my positive reinforcement to be more constructive, not just like, oh, good job. But I had some examples. I really like the way you drew those arrays. Your lines are so straight and even. Or I love how you drew the arrays and then you used the area formula to figure it out. That was fantastic. So just giving them more direct feedback that is more personal and about the content. For presenting instructional content, the biggest issue is probably just making sure I model and drawing these correctly, and so that the students know. Here it's kind of hard to tell, and I probably move faster than I would during a normal lesson. And if I didn't have time in a normal lesson, I might not do this one and just move on to the next one so we can spend enough time at each one so the students know how to draw it. Because I think one of the hardest things they might have is drawing them out. And making sure the rows and columns are even as best as possible and making sure they have the right amount. So the students will also use the orange square, so if they have a hard time drawing the arrays, they can make it with the pattern blocks, and then they can draw it, and hopefully that'll help them visualize it. And in this lesson, it was very much like, here they kind of just got to talk about it in their hook, but then it was I modeled this first one completely for them. Then this one was kind of like a we do. I got more feedback from them. This one was definitely a we do because they did it while I did it. And then, of course, for their independent practice and stations, it was a you do, and they did it independently, completely. So we worked from me doing everything to them doing everything. I want to make sure my mini lesson is no longer, including the hook, is no longer than 15 to 20 minutes. So that means, again, if I needed to take away a problem so I can focus on the others more, that's something I could do. To kind of build my lesson, of course, I went straight from the standards, but the third grade also made a pre-post test for this unit of area, so I used that to guide my instruction and kind of build my lesson. For lesson pacing and structure, I had 5 minutes planned out kind of for my hook, just for them to talk really quick. About 15 minutes for my mini lesson, 50 minutes for the students to work on their stations in independent practice, and then my closure would probably be about 5 minutes, just talk about it real quick, and then have them do that independently. I talked about this a little bit, but during the stations I can fool students that are having a hard time my math club kids that would be at the background table. I mentioned this, but I might make myself a station for these perimeter cards because it is kind of a next step that we haven't quite talked about, so they might struggle with that a bit. And then during stations, I could also meet with students yesterday who are having struggles and pull small groups. Like a normal lesson, I played the transition music, ring the chimes, say the word of the day, tried to make it flow as much as possible. Activities and materials, so I had my lesson PowerPoint, I had my whiteboards, tons of markers, I had the area sheet for the independent practice, the homework, pattern block squares, I had the Cheez-Its, I have the task cards, I would have in the classroom the dice and the graph paper and pens, everything they would need for yesterday's stations. And then for my activities, it was basically like the hook and the mini lesson. Then they did their independent practice. They had lots of different activities from those stations, which was where they wrote their name, they did the wall and find the area, and they had the task cards. And then my last kind of activity was the exit ticket. All of this is built straight off yesterday's lesson, and I even brought these in to show that students can still be using them. It was kind of exciting this lesson because they got to learn the secret, the area formula, and they used it so many times throughout the lesson, so that should definitely be cemented in their heads. And of course, we'll be talking about it a lot more in the future in the unit. Since my students are at a lot of different levels, something that might be easy for one student will be challenging for another student. I think especially by using the pattern blocks or the Cheez-Its, everyone can be scaffolded and everyone can succeed. So if a student's doing really good, they can finish their independent practice, they can start working on those stations, they can do that for as long as they need, keep going through, power through, keep doing the stuff, and do a great job. Whereas if a student is having a harder time with independent practice, then that's okay too, and I can work with them and give them more direct support. And then if they need more longer time in a station, we'll still switch to the next station, but they can work on that same station more tomorrow. I tried to give my students, when I was doing the mini lesson, I tried to give them think time so they could really think about the question and not just plot out answers right away. Some ways I can do this is, we didn't really use whiteboards a whole lot in this lesson, but if they're using whiteboards, write the answer on the whiteboard, then flip it over. When everyone's whiteboard is flipped over, I know they have the answer, so I can call on them. The PowerPoint is really what I use to guide my lesson, and it helped me stay on track. Again, if I need to skip one of the slides, one of the problems, I could have, but just by going through that, I was able to make sure I was getting my lesson all taught. For questioning, again, this is still the beginning of learning about areas, so a lot of my questions would still be lower level, just building that foundation, making sure they understand what area is. So I can ask, what is the area formula? What is a square unit? What is the label of this rug? For example, is it feet, inches, yards, miles? And then that was knowledge and comprehension. For application and analysis, I can ask, how can you find the area of a rectangle? What is another way you can use to find the area? Because I taught them 2 ways in this lesson. What else can you find the area of? So in the classroom, what could they find the area of? And why is the area formula so important? And then for creation and evaluation, I can ask them questions like, why do you multiply length times width to find the area? And what's the area of something in your house? So that means I would want them to go home, find the area, and then come back and tell me, well, why is the area formula so important? And then also, how can the area and the perimeter sometimes be different? So, we kind of talked about this yesterday, but if you have, 4 unit squares and you put them in different positions, the perimeter can be different based on how it is formed. So kind of how can that be? A lot of my questioning will come in during my mini lesson, but a lot of it will also be during stations and independent practice, because during the mini lesson I only have 15 minutes to teach all this information, so I kind of want to give it to them. And then during the 50 minutes of like stations and independent practice, we can talk about it more and go over any questions, and that's when I would be working on them more one-on-one, or going up to a table group or a station group and talking with them. And I also want them to be asking each other questions and talk about some concerns or wonderments that they have. So I don't want them to ask me every question they have, because the table group, or if they're doing a station, the station group before would know what to do, so they could ask that group before they come ask me. And I want to hear like a lot of math talk during this time. For some questions like I used for the rug, I would have them turn and talk to their partner. Sometimes I would use the popsicle sticks and call their names. And then sometimes I had the students call out an area, like call out the whole answer as a whole group. For academic feedback, definitely the hardest part of this lesson is drawing the arrays out and trying to figure out how to draw the rows and columns, because that can be a little bit complicated. So just making sure they use a pencil will help with that, so if they make a mistake, they can erase it. But also, I just need to make sure I model it, and even like throughout the independent practice and the stations, that I maybe have to go up to some students and show them exactly how I want it done, like on a one-on-one basis, slow enough that they, in like a pace that they need, so that they can know how to draw out the unit squares. And again, I would have pattern blocks available, so if they're really struggling with drawing it out, I'll be like, go get some pattern blocks, go with the pattern blocks, and do it that way. Because this is a good skill to know, but it's not essential. The main thing is the area formula. Main stuff I would be giving feedback on is independent practice, the exit slip, and the homework. In this, I'm pretty much looking for exact answers. So if they give an exact answer, like if they get it right, I can give them a sticker or a thumbs up or a little smiley face on their paper. And I could write some feedback on the exit slip and like the independent practice, but I'd most likely just meet with them in a small group, so we can talk about it. And I can, if they got something wrong, I can talk about them and think through what they were thinking, and then guide them towards the right answer without telling them the right answer. And again, if the whole class struggled with something, I could do it as a morning energizer or on the next day's mini lesson. Again, when students are doing the independent practice, I'm going to be circulating around the room, checking on all of them. I'll have to do my mini lesson with my math club, so making sure with my math club kids, so making sure I teach them that thoroughly so they know exactly what's going on. And then checking in with that group very often, because those are my lowest level students. When I am giving that mini lesson, I want all other students to not bother us, so we can get through the mini lesson for the math club kids, so they can either ask the table groups, their friends, one of their partners, so I'm not getting all the questions. I also want to be listening to what the students are telling me. So if I hear students saying something like, I wish we would do this, or why do we always have to do this, then I can hear that and use that to change my next lessons. Of course, there's some times when the students are going to have to do problems and they just need to get the work done and have that grit, but I want to make it as fun for them as possible. For grouping, the students are on whole group activity when we had the mini lesson. They're on individual when they do like the independent practice and the exit slip, and then they're doing small groups when they do the stations. For my mini lesson, 5 or so students are at my math clubs, so I have a smaller class, but I still want them to make sure they're sitting in a spot where they won't be distracted or talking to their neighbors during that time. For the math stations, Miss McCarthy and I built those groups together, but the math club kids are all in one station, and they're definitely the lower level, so again I would meet with them. But then I have one of the groups has much higher level, so that's when I'd be asking them those higher level thinking questions, giving them that extra support, giving them those extra ideas, expanding their ideas. And then with some groups, they can do the work. I just need to make sure they stay on task and are being focused. Teacher content of knowledge. A lot of this came in when I was creating and planning the lesson. And this is why I really love the PowerPoint, because it helps me stay on track when I'm actually teaching the lesson. So if I made my lesson, I had it pre-conferenced. I went from the standards, looked at the pre and post test that the 3rd grade team made, and then during my lesson, it's my responsibility to make sure I stay true to the the PowerPoint and lesson plan that I made. There's sometimes when students make connections that I cannot plan or predict, and I sometimes struggle with this. So in that moment, if they make a connection, I need to pause, think about how I can really build on what that student said, and then really expound upon that, because the more connections they make, the more they're thinking, and then the more the whole class is able just to have more ideas and think about stuff. Also, I need to be using the right vocabulary, like unit square, area formula, length times width, perimeter, arrays, multiplication. Just making sure I'm using that area vocabulary so that the students are very familiar with it. For teacher knowledge of students, I said this ties a lot in with my grouping of students. So just knowing which ones need the support and which ones need that extra higher level thinking. Like I said, I think there's a group with Tanner, Megan, Kylie, and Miles. So those are my students that have the strongest math level. So I'd want to be asking them more application questions like, so now you know this area formula, how can you use it in the real world? How can you use it outside of this classroom? And again, some students just may need help staying on task and focused. For thinking, I have practical thinking and then analytical thinking. And for my practical thinking, I had a couple real life problems. So like the rug, the picture frames, then I think there were some more rugs. All of the stations is very real life thinking, because these are actual problems, mainly about like bedrooms and stuff, but that's real life thinking. And that's something that I would use in future lessons by having the students measure different things around the classroom, around the house, and then find the area of it, because area is a very practical skill. And then I also had analytical thinking, so like the problem where I had them compare the two different areas. They had to draw the arrays and the unit squares, and they had to check it with their area formula. They had to do that the same thing with the second problem, and then they had to compare and contrast and see which one was bigger and which one was smaller. And then they also had to compare of like different units. So, for example, in the independent practice, they use centimeters, they use feet, they use meters, they use inches. So just making sure they kind of know what those are. And that's something I would more talk to them on a small group basis. But being like, this is 2 meters, that's really long, but this is only 3 centimeters, so that's pretty short. And the students will be using the area formula on lots of different problems and different opportunities throughout the lesson, so they have lots of time to practice. For problem solving, I had drawing conclusions and like justifying their answers. So for all of my problems, I had the students do it in 2 different ways, the area formula and drawing the arrays. So they had to definitely tell me different ways they were thinking of it and show me both ways. And then from generating ideas, this is just something I want them to be thinking about. How can you use area in real life and all around us? And that's something I kind of mentioned in my mini lesson, but I would also be thinking about throughout my stations. For example, I could be like, so imagine this is your kitchen table, and it's this big by this big. Would it fit in your kitchen? Would you need a different shape? Do you need a different size? So just kind of have them thinking about it in a real life situation. For instructional plans, I already kind of talked about this. I use the third grade's team's pre and post test. I use the standards. I use the My Math textbook. That's kind of where I got all my information from. And then I started with basic, the students just thinking about it, and then I modeled it for them, and then we did it all together, and then they did it independently for themselves for like the exit slip and the independent practice. And this lesson builds exactly off of yesterday's lesson because we're still using the unit squares and to find our area. So I think that was very helpful for them. This whole lesson is very hands-on, and I would want to still have these out so students can use them at any point and feel comfortable using them. Because the more they build and they use these hands-on objects, the more concrete it'll become in their brain, and the more they'll have a better handle on it. In my instructional plans, I had accommodations for my math club kids by reteaching them the mini lesson. And then those are also my lowest level students, and they would be in one station group. So making sure I circle back to that group often, making sure they're doing everything they need to do. For student work, again, students were kind of copying and following whatever I modeled at the beginning of the lesson and during my mini lesson. But then even when we were finding the greatest area, they were starting to do it on their own and work more independently. And then by the end, they were doing the whole thing independently. And I like how I asked them at the end, like, do you think you did this? Do you think you know the I can statement? Is that good? Do you have any questions? Just so they're thinking in their brains and they're thinking about their learning, which helps them out. Yeah, okay, I already did that page. During this lesson, there isn't a lot of writing, like sentences per se, but the students are definitely drawing, and they're showing me if they do it the way I want them to. They're showing me they really know how to use the unit squares, how to find the area. And of course, some students won't automatically know 6 times 4, so if they need to write that out, use a whiteboard, draw that on a different piece of paper, they would be more than welcome to do that. And again, I want them, for the student work, I want them to be thinking about how they can use area in a more real-life situation. For my assessment, during, like a more formative assessment is during the lesson, I can see how they drew these, and I might have them write their names on it and actually hand those in so that I can look at and see how they did. But then, of course, the independent practice, I would be looking at that quite closely. The exit slip, really, the exit slip follows right with the I can statement. So if they can do the exit slip, then they got this lesson under control. I would also be looking at their homework to making sure they're doing that. And then at the end of the week, I would be looking at the different activities they did for those stations. And again, there's so many different ways I'm assessing them that if they really mess up on one activity, I have other papers and other activities that I can use, and plus what I'm seeing with my own eyes, that I can see how they're really doing, and if were they just not focusing for this one, or were they distracted, did they really have a struggle but then they overcame it, and also it won't bring their grade down because there are so many different activities. Expectations again in this lesson is pretty important, and I think when I put them out to those stations, I was like, hey guys, be careful about the pattern blocks and the dice, because that is something that the students get very distracted by, and sometimes during stations it can get kind of chaotic, and there's like pattern blocks and dice all over the room, which I definitely don't want. So I was like, that's why I had them keep the pattern blocks on the whiteboard so that they don't go all over the place. When I'm having my mini lesson, I want them to be in a spot where they won't be distracted by their neighbors. So before I start the lesson, I would want to do that. Be like, are you in a good spot? Are you not going to be distracted? I don't want students to call out. And if they have a question, I want them to raise their hand. I want them to have as many questions and comments as possible, especially if it has to do with the lesson. But I just want to make sure I remind them to raise their hand. sometimes I would have the whole class call out, but I need to make sure that I say, okay, everyone answer this question so they know they are allowed to call out and it's a specific situation. Also for me, before I start teaching, I need to make sure the students are seated and ready to work and ready to listen, so I'm not teaching to a bunch of random students walking around the room and doing different things, and then their focus is solely on me. Again, when I'm teaching, if they're using their pen and paper, I think I said this, but if I'm starting